Today's speaker, historian Lawrence Stern, is no stranger to the North Shore Senior Center, having spoken here several times. He has lectured all over the country, and his talks have always been exemplified by his extensive research on his subjects. I guarantee you, you can expect to come away more informed and knowledgeable on his topic. So Larry, it's all yours.
Thank you very much for coming. Before I begin, I just want to mention, I fell down January 10th on some black ice, and I did a real good job of myself. I broke my wrist, I broke my hip, got 4 stitches in the head, and I injured my shoulder. But other than that, I'm okay. If I stumble at some point, just be patient with me and hopefully it'll be understandable. I want to thank you very much for coming and for listening on Zoom. I want to make a couple of comments. When history is not taught, extremists will distort an understanding, and consequently, they will shape policy for the future. I want to give you that one more time. When history is not taught, the extremists will distort our understanding of the past and consequently shape how we approach the future. I want to talk a little bit about President Franklin Roosevelt. He had the uncanny ability, the brilliance and the foresight to think ahead and forecast what the future will be encountering. In March of 1933, he told the American Jewish leaders to get the Jews out of Germany. In April, he informed key advisors the United States will have a war with history. In 1944, the European countries should give up all their colonies after the war. This antagonized Charles de Gaulle of France because he told him if they don't, he felt there would be a conflict in Vietnam. De Gaulle sharply disagreed with him. January 1945, in a speech, he laid out a plan to rebuild Europe, which afterwards became known as the Marshall Plan. After the war, spoke out of a new world order that increased trade would increase the threat of future conflict, and the countries will become more dependent on one another. My research about Roosevelt influenced me regarding the Israeli-Palestinian situation. I have grandchildren in college, and they had the opportunity to visit some college campuses. At all these schools, excuse me, they had Hillels and Abad, where Jewish students could come, have social events, hear speakers. In addition, some had classes in the colleges, a number of the universities. All my grandchildren told me stories and confrontations with Palestinian demonstrators. In addition, also drew some Black and Caucasian students as well. They felt sympathy for their cause. They were at a loss at how to respond. To my surprise, even encounters with some of the leaders of these organizations, the answers they had, I don't think really had enough strength and information to counteract what they were hearing from these Arab students and demonstrators. Some historical events. 1846, the Mexican-American War. The United States won, the victor set the terms. Our country expanded. Mexico ceded Arizona, California, Nevada, Utah, parts of Colorado, and New Mexico. 1922, the League of Nations recognized Jews who lived for thousands of years throughout Palestine. 1949, the Geneva Conference prohibits occupiers from transferring people taken in a war. Note, this was 1949, 1 year after Israel became a state. In order to get a better understanding of the situation, I felt it was essential to know what your opponents are thinking and what they want to do. So I reviewed 5 books. And, the first one was by an Israeli writer, Concise History of a Nation. The second, In Defense of Israel, by John Hagee. And the third was by Shimon Peres, who later became a prime minister, who was a prime minister. Nir Baram, A Land Without Borders, by an Arab writer. And the last was Voice of Hezbollah, which I will comment quite a bit during the lecture. To recognize the Palestinian refugee situation, we have to face the reality. This is not just Israel and the Palestinians. It is Israel versus the Arab world. I cannot stress that. 5 armies attacked, plus the enemy within, the Palestinians. In addition, they had the support of 15 members of the Arab League. There will not be a full peace with the Palestinians unless the Arab nations approve. This is extremely important and cannot be overstated. Comment. If we want to know where we are going, we have to know where we have been. It's essential to know and understand history. Some background. After 74 years, no resolution, important. Prior to 1948, an establishment of Israel, still no solution. In the summer of 1944, President Roosevelt calls on a man named Walter Lodemilk. He was a top government official who was a renowned world expert on soil. He asked him to go to Palestine and determine, is the soil suitable for agriculture? Lowenthal goes, returns, and reports the land requires hard work, but the soil has definite potential. The Jews excelled in farming and raising of livestock. Their yield per acre far exceeded the Arabs. Also, he knew how to drain water from swamps, use water more effectively, and grow a variety of crops. Roosevelt responds very enthusiastically. He realizes the only way you'll make a deal with the Arabs, they must get a benefit. Without a benefit, they will never make a deal. And he felt that if they could increase their food supply dramatically, this could maybe bring it forward. In 1944, the Democratic National Convention was held here in Chicago. This is the party platform. I have an original. It's very, very short. There's just nothing to it. However, it's extremely, extremely important. Oh, wait a second, I think I missed something. Yes, it says, we favor the opening of Palestine to unrestricted Jewish immigration and such a policy as to result in the establishment thereof of a free and democratic Jewish commonwealth. Truman, who came in just before the convention, it had no input in the platform. So this was all from FDR. I want to discuss something in the Yalta conference, which I found really surprised me a lot. Whoops. man named Charles Bolin, he is here on the left. He was an interpreter. He could speak at least a half a dozen languages. And he was FDR interpreter for the conference. It was February. Stalin and the president were discussing the war. Years earlier, Stalin had received a plan from FDR on how to achieve victory. He was very apprehensive, but Roosevelt pushed the issue, Stalin accepted, and it worked. And what surprised me about Stalin, his personality, he thanked Roosevelt for his advice. And then he said to him, "What can I do for you?" So when I read this, I put a piece of paper down and I said, if I was at that conference and had that question, what would I say to Stalin? And of course, I couldn't figure it out. So I removed a piece of paper. Roosevelt said to Stalin that after the war, there will be a vote in the United Nations for a Jewish state. He says, I am a Zionist, and I would like you to vote yes. Stalin said he would. He then talked to Churchill. Churchill was non-committal. When the UN vote did come up, Churchill was out of power, Britain abstained, Stalin kept his word and voted in favor of a Jewish state. Here's the three men, with, of course, FDR in the center. If you look at Roosevelt's picture, you can see he's very sick. He's an old man, and death was unfortunately approaching. When the conference concluded, Roosevelt flew over 1,000 miles in a prop plane, of course, to meet three Arab kings to discuss the Jewish state. The first two went pretty well. The third was with the King bin Saud of Saudi Arabia, and he gave him his proposal. The king responded, I would rather die than yield any of our land to the Jews. Very firm statement. Unfortunately, many Arabs today still continue to have that feeling. Roosevelt returns to the United States. One of the very first meetings he had was with Rabbi Stephen Weiss. I researched, was there any notes from either Stephen Weiss or Roosevelt after they two had a meeting regarding Palestine? There is nothing by either man that states that Roosevelt was looking for any kind of compromise or partition. Roosevelt's common feeling was the Jews should have one country. The Arabs have 30, the Jews are entitled to one. That was his position. The situation in Palestine before partition. One, Jews were receiving donations from Zionists in the United States. This contributed to advancing their economy. Two, they exceeded the Arabs in education, where the majority were illiterate. Three, most Jews were urban, Palestinians rural. Four, major cities such as Haifa, Jerusalem, and Tel Aviv had large Jewish communities, also quite a number of Arabs. When there's still a number of Arabs in Haifa. The Jews had a governmental, kind of a de facto government in place. The Arabs considered themselves a British colony. They were a colony for decades. Some Western powers were very hostile towards the Arabs because they had backed Hitler. The UN began discussing regarding the partition. the Jews accept a willingness to accept. The Arabs, the Palestinians, along with the Arab League, flatly rejected any type of proposal to give the Jews any land whatsoever. They wanted the whole thing. The United States voted partition effective May 14th, 1948. Two important points. The UN had in place UNHCR, the United Nations High Commission for Refugees. Two, according to many books I read by Arab authors, Jordan had an understanding with Ben Gurion, who became the first prime minister. They would have limited military interests, and in return, if Israel won, they could keep the West Bank. They felt an independent Palestinian country would be a political threat to their own. Before the establishment of Israel, 5 countries prepared to attack. 5: Egypt, Jordan, Iraq, Lebanon, and Syria. Very important, they announced to the world, we will drive the Jews into the sea. Very, very strong statement. We will drive them into the sea. In other words, no compromise. Arab residents were instructed by the five incoming armies, pack up your suitcase, leave your clothes in your closets, your food in the refrigerator. You'll return in a week as victors. 1 week, it's going to be over. David Ben Gurion, who became the prime minister, told the Palestinians, quote, if you leave, you cannot return. This message was repeated consistently in newspapers, radio, and they sent sound trucks throughout villages all throughout the country. Palestinians rapidly attacked some of the Israeli convoys, and the Jews drove some Arabs out of some of the small villages. Before the deadline, the Palestinians fled in droves. There were 2 examples. Haifa had a relatively good coexistence with the Jews, the Arabs, and also in Jerusalem, many of the Arabs remained. When they became a country, the Zionists proclaimed a new state. And here is Ben Gurion announcing the birth of Israel. When the mandate went into effect, 5 Arab countries attacked. Israel's army was vastly outnumbered. They moved forward. General Moshe Dayan directed our command to sweep into the villages, into enemy villages and small areas, small towns, and the Arabs just fled. By doing this, the Israeli army was able to move very, very fast. The result, Israel won the war. They enlarged their territory. The Arab countries expelled approximately 800,000 Jews. That's 97% of the Jewish population of the Arab countries left. All they could take is what they could carry. I want to emphasize this. The Arab countries says, get out. 97% did. We're talking approximately 800,000 Jewish people. Most settled in Israel, which at the time was very stressed for finances. It was a very small country, but somehow they managed to accommodate it. I don't know how, but they did it. Many Palestinians, of course, left. They estimate, depending on where you read, 275,000 to 700,000. Jordan annexed parts of the West Bank and East Jerusalem, according again to the deal that was made prior to the war. Whether that was all true, there never was any firm knowledge. Where did the refugees go? 20 Muslim nations. Think about this. Not one Arab country put up a welcome sign, you can come here. 30. Not one said, we will take in a refugee. Thousands had moved into Jordan, by the way. Israel feared if thousands of Palestinians return, could they be trusted? Would they become an additional threat and ally themselves with another invading army? This would have been Israel's worst nightmare. I believe this was a valid reason to reject. After losing, the Arabs devised a very clever plan. They had patience, were willing to use the refugees as pawns. Even if that meant subjecting them to decades of hardship and substandard living conditions. They just didn't care. The UN formed a refugee agency, the UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Works Agencies. The Arabs successfully lobbied the UN. They wanted to treat the Palestinians as a separate problem. They felt this was a refugee issue, and they called for separate funding, reparations, and compensation and assistance. Why? The Arabs calculated a separate state would require greater attention than seeing it part of a group. The longer they were boxed in, their living conditions would continue to deteriorate. Over time, people would forget the origins of history. The Arabs would hold Israel responsible, and they would not allow the return of the Arabs. Palestine was never an Arab country. For decades, it was a British colony. In 1964, the Arab League contrived a very unique maneuver. Palestine was now to be recognized as a distinct nation. The main purpose, regain all of its land through armed struggle. Armed struggle. Decades have passed, and many refugees continue to live in deplorable conditions in limited space. Large families exacerbated the situation, less limited opportunity for employment, for schools, for levels, and they promoted hate in the schools. I want to point out that some Arabs got into Lebanon. They were not allowed until about 4 years ago to have like regular type of jobs. The only thing they could get was like janitor, security guards, things of that type. College graduates were like bathroom attendants. It didn't matter. They were held down until just about 4 years ago. Now, 5 more wars ensued. 1949, 56, 67, 73, 1982. Repeatedly, they said they will drive the Jews into the sea. To this day, the Arab nations have continued to make their intentions very clear. We do not want the Palestinians. They can rot in the camps. They still don't take them in as refugees. This is now the most important part of the lecture. And so I'm asking you for your really 100% attention. If Israel lost any of the wars, any, and the Arabs drove them into the sea, and at that point, if the Jews said, we would like the right of return, and the Arabs would have given it to them, I'd like to see you raise your hand. I will take questions at the end. Examine the record. Syria, Assad, both the father and the son, used poison against their own people. the Iran-Iraq war, over 1 million got killed. The continued bombing of Yemen. I take the Arabs at their word. I believe them. If they had the opportunity to drive men to the sea, they would have. Oh, where's it? Okay. Just to give you an idea at the map, just look how small Israel is. It's about the size of New Jersey. You can see how it's surrounded by all these Arab countries, plus others which are not on the map. Life magazine, 1947. How Israel won the Six-Day War. In 1968, April, Look magazine had an article, quite an interesting article. There was Moshe Dayan. Now, in this article, it says, quote, "It will be a miracle if Israel survives another 20 years. 2.6 million Israelis surrounded by 20 million Arabs." Think about this, a miracle. If these editors were still alive today, I would love to ask them, what do you think now? Israel really surprised them. They underestimated it. The Oslo Accords, 1993. There was an agreement between Israel, Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, head of the Palestinian Liberation Organization, headed by Yasser Arafat. They achieved a major breakthrough. They signed an agreement at the White House that the Arabs would get the Gaza Strip, other territorial concessions, and Israel would release 5,000 prisoners. It was signed, sealed by the men in the picture, 1994. But the problem was Arafat reneged on the deal. After he signed it, he later asked for more, and that broke the deal. 1994, Arafat was speaking at a mosque in Johannesburg, and he spoke in Arabic, saying the Arabs have no intention of making a peace with Israel. Arafat devoted his life to deterioration and victory over the country. Moving on. Years ago, I would take my brother to hear Palestinian speakers. I was much younger at the time. In the spring of 2004, we attended a lecture that attracted a very large audience. At the conclusion, it was announced there would be a meeting of the Executive Council, and the room was clear. Everyone else was required to leave. My brother and I went to the bathroom, and I saw a booklet on a counter. I grabbed it, tucked it under my coat, and we made a quick exit. The document proposed a new operation to defeat Israel without a military conflict. I will summarize. 1, motivate people that is in the best interest of Israel. If it wishes to prosper and live peacefully, they have a responsibility to build a relationship with their neighbors. 2, Palestinians must obtain allies outside the Arab world. Make their case on the world stage. Excellent platform is the UN and other global forums. 3, Palestinians and their supporters must double their efforts to educate Israel's most important benefactor, the United States. The US has to learn how poor the residents are in the camp and their conditions. So shameful. It said to reach out on radio, television stations, letters to the editor, newspapers, constantly stress to try to reach government officials as well. But they must exchange conversations also with college students and Jews. They felt college students are a very good source because some of them have extremely liberal ideas, and today they don't want to read history like they used to, so their lack of knowledge would be very, unfortunately, would be very high. 4, leaders of undeveloped third world countries are susceptible as they can share a concern with richer countries that they're taking advantage of. 5, Palestine has to be moved from being a stateless nation to creating a nation state. Adopt a vision based on democracy and neutrality. This would disarm the Jews. They felt it would attract new allies. You must know your opponent. And if you in some way you can weaken their cause, it advances yours. 6, develop policies on long-term responsible leaders, good government, and human rights. This is the Palestinians talking about human rights. And the last one, avoid violence. A couple of comments. When I was reviewing the 7-point plan, I felt it was sending me a message. I read it repeatedly. Adopt a vision based on democracy and neutrality. This would disarm your opponent and attract new allies to bolster your cause. In the de facto way, the Palestinians are saying, we are the ones that believe in democracy, which then means the Israelis do not. Very clever ploy. In addition, will attract people and also try to infiltrate Jewish organizations and present your viewpoint. Think about this, infiltrate. From this Palestinian perspective, I felt this was a very sound strategy. The Palestinians developed this plan in 2004. It is 18 years later, and it demonstrates that some of this is working. I sent this information to AIPAC, and they responded they already had it. What surprised me so much is why didn't they come out and announce it and show the Jewish world what to be prepared for? I don't have any reason to know what they did, but they never had. They just kept it under wraps. Again, this is not a one-on-one conflict. I cannot overstate. It continues, Israel versus the Palestinians. The Arab world. For decades, Palestinian teachers and in their textbooks have indoctrinated their students to hate the Jews. To advance this agenda, they promoted this as patriotism. Repeatedly, Israel stated that any peace deal requires this step. They always wanted all the territory. When Israel became a state in 1948, Americans understood anti-Semitism and the Holocaust. There was an outpouring of sympathy for the Jews in Israel. Now, 70 plus years later, it's apparent they no longer hold these views. This even includes some Jews. Years ago, the Arabs developed a new powerful tool to influence the American public opinion. They went into the export business. They exported people. Thousands of Palestinians who were denied entry into Middle Eastern countries into the United States and Europe. They were actively promoting their agenda, and most important, never allowed their situation to disappear like a fire. It may simmer, but it never goes out. Another effective tactics, students. Our country has accepted thousands. The United States They have a dual purpose: to educate plus sway others of their plight. I find it so fascinating that our country accepts more than all these other Arab countries, even to this day, even to this day. Across the country, college students are confronted not only by Palestinians, but in addition by Gentiles and well-meaning Jews. I had the opportunity to discuss this situation with Chabad and Hillel directors at some universities. I asked them, how do you instruct your students to counteract? None, I felt, really had a sound plan. Some American Jews have had a falling out with Israel. They feel they don't like the power of the ultra-Orthodox. Examples, they cannot perform weddings and other functions. Americans do not fully understand Israel. It is a liberal democracy. It is, in a sense, it is not a liberal democracy. I would call it a religious democracy. There is a difference. Opposition to the Jews. What's going on today? November 2007, England removed the Holocaust studies from their textbooks. They removed it. And the reason, the Muslim population said it never occurred. This is England. Here's something about the, wait a second, I think I went too fast. Yeah, okay, in Canada, the courts ruled, there was a full-page ad in the New York Times. They said wines made in the West Bank cannot be labeled from Israel. Full-page ad. In addition, it's surprising even the reaction of some of the Jews. Peter Barnett, a national writer and the Jews, and he's in an article. Oh, wait a second. Oh, I'm not sure what happened to it. Anyway, he had an article that the Palestinians deserve the right to return. A Jewish writer. In addition, there's a man named Mikach Goodman. He's an author and a writer. He teaches at a Hebrew university. He writes an article that the Arabs, again, are entitled to their rights. In both of these articles, it states what Israel should do. Neither one states what the Palestinians should do. According to them, let them in, and the Arabs should do zero. Another example is the BDS movement, the Boycott, Disinvestment, Sanctions. This is a national organization advocating a boycott of Israel bonds, investing in companies, and any type of aid from the United States or any other country. They've been very effective in drawing comparisons to South Africa from the blacks regarding the Palestinian refugees. They also made inroads with liberal students on college campuses and private universities. Their goal, Israel should draw from the West Bank, promote its two-state solution. When Israel withdrew from Gaza, they received no benefit. It backfired. Question, why do they only focus on Israel? Conditions in China, Myanmar, Kashmir, Syria, and with the Kurds and other places, they have no boycotts, no boycotts. The world views Israel as a nation guilty of human rights abuse. But there is another factor. It's the only Jewish state in the world. I believe that those who support the BDS movement, also promote anti-Semitism. It's about the DVS, some demonstrations, and another. If Israel makes concessions or offers financial retribution, and the 20 Arab nations are not required to do anything or show any responsibility, they are saying, in effect, it was their responsibility, but nobody else had to do anything else. Further, the BDS movement, 3 of the founders, 3 were Arabs. In 2014, Gaza, the majority of rich Arab countries pledged millions of dollars to help rebuild it. It was basically conversation because most of them did nothing or they reduced the payments. The Arabs have repeatedly stated they do not want to move one generation after another where their parents had resided, also the grandparents. The facts do not confirm this. It is a bogus theory. Just look at how many Arabs have left their homeland for Europe. Hamas charter states they do not recognize Israel. It calls for its complete destruction. There was quite an article in the New York Times about a month ago. There were a man and a woman discussing the Palestinian situation. The woman is a rabbi, and she feels that the Arabs should have the right of return. The man also agrees. They do not say or ask what the Arabs should do. It's always what the Jews should do. It's a one-sided situation. Here's a street in Gaza. If you look at the buildings, they're in somewhat fair condition. However, they always complain they do not have enough money. And in some of the poor neighborhoods, they don't even pick up the garbage. What is the future? I do not know if there will ever be peace. All sides must want it and be willing to cooperate. It is so important. When you remember the Cuban Missile Crisis with Kennedy and Khrushchev, we did not know it at the time, but we found out later that Khrushchev wanted a deal. If he wanted a deal, then you 2 sides can work something out. If one side does not want a deal, no matter how smart or what the other side offers, you can't do it. Both sides have to be willing at some point. If not, you got nothing. The ultra-Orthodox, a power in the coalition Israeli government, show no signs of modifying their position. Meanwhile, Israel's population continues to increase. They are confronted how to provide housing. They have 3 options: build taller buildings, expand on the West Bank, or a combination. Arab countries played a critical role in creating this situation. They must step forward and accept thousands of Palestinians. It's not just up to Israel. Israel then maybe have to participate. The Arabs and the Palestinians want a 2-state solution. The UN partition was 2 states. Way back, 2 states. The Arabs rejected it. This is now 2022, not 1948. It's time for both sides to reevaluate their situation and accept the reality of what is happening today. The further from the birth of Israel, the Jews the Jews have been losing public opinion. Why? The Jews frequently require, why they've been losing public opinion, why the Jews require a state. In 2019, US voters, there was a survey, which side of the Israel-Palestinian conflict they sympathize with. The lowest in years, 43% Israel, 30% Palestinians, 27% no opinion. Is there a benefit for Israel because of Iran? I feel yes, because some Arab nations fear Iran more than they do Israel. And they are motivated to have Israel for an ally. Today, Israel is recognized by 5 Arab countries and unofficially by 1 or 2 more. However, there is a continual conflict with Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, both supported by Iran. They smuggle in thousands of rockets plus launchers. They have vehicles that are capable of shooting 8 missiles in a matter of seconds. They are training their personnel. They are infiltrating spies into Israel. There's an enemy within. The Arabs have houses with weapons, also in schools, hospitals, morgues, crowded apartment buildings. Extremely important. We've been sending concrete to Gaza, the purpose to build housing. Housing. Israel protects its citizens. It protects its citizens. The enemy endangers their system. Hamas has all this cement. They have built hundreds of miles of tunnels, hundreds. I'm going to ask the question, I want you to think about it in your own mind for a second. How many bomb shelters has Hamas built for its own citizens? How many? Think. 0. 0. Not 1. Do they care about their people? Answer that in your own mind. If the Palestinians obtain a West Bank state, I guarantee you, Iran will do all in its can to gain control. A well-equipped military on 3 sides could be the demise of Israel. No Israeli government could accept. The Arab world is no longer strongly pushing for a 2-state solution. It is crystal clear they are really not interested. Question. There are 20 Arab countries. Where is it written that the Jews should not have one? I believe Franklin Roosevelt was correct in 1944 that the Jewish people were entitled to all of Palestine. On the world stage, they are severely outnumbered. They cannot afford to be in a position that would jeopardize their lives. If Israel were to make a mistake and grant this to them, and then be defeated, they do not want people to eulogize at their funeral that they were valiant, good people. We don't want that eulogy. Here's my email. If anyone is interested for questions, I have a DVD for sale. It's only $5. I think it's really important that your grandchildren, your children, I don't care if they're 30, 40, or 50, should be knowledgeable of what's happening. It's so important because you just have no idea who knows who. There are many governments, state governments, local, that do buy Israel bonds and support us. It's important that Gentiles are well aware of what's going on. I'll be happy to take questions, 1 question per person. Thank you.
take questions here first, then we'll do.
Yes, go ahead.
You mentioned a document that listed these seven, I would say,
Part of the plan. that
I'm
the
sorry?
Arabs had. You talking about the plan the Arabs had?
yes, the
Yeah.
plan that the Arabs
Yeah.
have to basically overpower Israel, but not by violence, but
Yes.
rather by industrious measures, which I thought
Yeah.
was very, very interesting. My question is, where was this document? Who found it? And why hasn't it been exposed?
Okay, I commented, I don't know why it was never exposed, because when I sent it to them, the only answer that they knew about it, but I don't know why they didn't. They actually, it's actually from a book written by an Arab leader. That's where they took it
It
from.
was in a book.
Yeah,
Okay, but can you be more explicit? The name of the book, the name of the Arab leader?
the only thing I have is the pages from that book. So I don't even know the name of the book.
Okay,
That's all I got.
and that's never been publicized?
I don't know
It's
why.
never- Okay, do you have an opportunity to write to the newspapers? Even, as they have the, what is it, letters to the editor
Yeah.
type of page, just so that this kind of information gets exposed.
Okay, I only want to take one question. In order for something to have any kind of merit, you have to have an organized effort. Organized from a central command. It has to occur nationally to have any kind of impact. You have to get people to lobby Congress. One or two letters is meaningless. It has to be organized. That's the only thing that has any effect. If they get a lot of it. Okay. no,
Ron, do you want to take questions from Zoom now? Oh, I'm sorry, we got one more. We still have one more question here.
Okay, there was a historical parallel in the conflict between Protestant Christianity and Catholic Christianity, which was resolved by the Peace of Westphalia, I think in 1668. And each side proclaimed the supremacy of their position. However, we have Arab proclamation again and again and again of a non-negotiable belief in the supremacy of Islam. And Israel is a thorn in their side of denial of the moral, political, and cultural supremacy of Islam. Now, such supremacy is a myth. And in counterattack, the Jews have to demonstrate and prove solidly with facts the failure of Islam for its peoples. And it has been there. And bring forth with pictures, testimony, and other evidence that overwhelmingly makes the case. Without it, they will keep chipping away at Israeli presence, which they see denies the supremacy of Islam.
I firmly feel, based on the Arabs and their position, you might as well ask to break down that wall with my hip and you and your Walker to come and help me. It's simply not going to happen because they have demonstrated repeatedly over and over and over and over again. They want the area. They don't need it. They don't need it at all. They just want it because they think they should have it. Now, the only reason we finally got some more countries to come before us is because of Iran. And they feel a possible threat to themselves. So they want maybe Israel help, technology, what have you. In other words, it's not a religious issue. It's certainly a political issue.
It is.
Yeah, so, yeah, okay. I'll tell you, I want to take the other questions.
Yeah, Ron, do you want to take over now?
Yes, thank you, Fred. There's a few comments made, and I'll read those comments. First, I'll ask a couple questions. Marsha Clark is asking, I don't understand why the garbage isn't being picked up. Is it that the money the Palestinians receive doesn't get funneled to the right people?
Yes, they don't want to. In the poor areas, they're stuck. So they do clean it up every once in a while. But it's for the same reason that they don't build safety. And in other words, they take their cement and they use it strictly for tunnels. They're not building anything to put their people in to protect their lives. They don't care. I think it's extremely evident. I'm looking for the evidence. Where do they care about the Palestinians? Hamas or Hezbollah? They don't care. So if the garbage is there, if you pick it up in 2 weeks or 4 weeks, what difference does it make? They don't care. As I said,
Let me cover some others
points.
on
Go
this,
ahead.
Larry.
Yeah, sure.
I had a couple. Is Israel losing the public relations war, even with young Jewish college students, by being perceived as bullies against the underdog Palestinians? Again, that's perception. I'm not saying that's a fact, but are they losing the PR war with even young college students being perceived as beating up on the Palestinians?
Okay. I'm sorry to say, according to some surveys, it is not perceived, it is happening. And I think there are different organizations and they're trying to do things. What I try to point out in the lecture, I don't think they're handling this right. It is difficult to get some Jewish students even to come to Hallel, to an Abad or Hillel. They're just not interested. If you look statistically what's happening, not only in the United States, but around the world, the religions are all going down as far as numbers. And the biggest increase is atheists and agnostics. And it's not just the Jews or the Catholics or the Protestants, it's worldwide. And part of the reason of Israel was we felt a kinship to our people in that country. But as religion decreases, you're getting fewer and fewer. And the Orthodox are increasing. And when you see a war and they're not participating, they don't get the best support either. Also, by the way, they're a huge financial drain on the country. Okay, another question.
Yes. Karen is asking a question and it kind of melds with mine. I had a question of what might happen should the Republicans, as expected, take over Congress. Might anything significantly change? And Karen asks this, which I think ties into it. How big of a difference does it make who is the head of Israel and of the United States government?
Okay.
In other words, might things change if
Yeah.
things change?
Okay. In my opinion, the biggest threat, unequivocally, 100%, without a doubt, facing the entire world is climate. Climate. In the Mediterranean, the sea is warming. As it warms, fishes are dying. It is producing more salt. Israel depends on desaltization plants. Israel has asked the manufacturers, how much salt can these machines keep absorbing? The manufacturers never anticipated this. They don't know. There are parts of Egypt where the water is now rising. They say within the next 20 or 30 years, Cairo, which is about 130 miles from the Mediterranean Sea, will be flooded. Flooded. Jerusalem is about like 30. I mean, Israel does something very interesting. They include the pollution and climate in one agency, which I think is a very good idea. In reading some of these documents, I was fascinated. The biggest threat they feel is food in Africa. As food in Africa decreases, you're going to have millions of people moving north. And we think we have trouble with our border in Mexico. It's going to be child's play. They're just going to walk and go north as far as they can. As far as changes, if you get a government in the United States to try to slow down the climate, because I don't feel we're going to stop the climate change, if we can slow it down, I think it's not only going to benefit Israel, but the entire world. But as far as, certain government things, I mean, like Israel recognized Jerusalem as the capital. That's very nice. What did it do for practical purposes? Has it motivated any Arabs to come to us, who come to Israel? You really have to have concrete things. And I don't think our government is going to sway us or the Arabs. Another question.
Larry, the last two were just comments that said, very enlightening and thank you. It's very interesting. Otherwise, I'll turn it back over to the auditorium to see if there are any other. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was an excellent speech.
Thank you for attending.